You're listening to Ocupolitics, a Harry Potter reread podcast focusing on politics in the wizarding world. As always, I'm Adri, one of your hosts and a recovering English major, dreading the Texas summer already.
I feel like you dread the Texas summer and I dread the Minnesota winter. So, like, I feel like this is saying something about our choices of where to live.
Yeah, well, it's also saying something about like our propensity for how weather affects our moods.
Very true. Very true. Well, I'm Helene, your other host, producer, and actually a happy Minnesotan right now who enjoyed a delightful yet rare, very rare, 75-degree day outside.
Speaking of weather, I feel like Helene is still overdue for a Texas visit. So I'm just putting this out in the universe.
Yes, I am overdue. I don't think I've ever actually been to Texas before, so it's definitely got to happen.
Also, San Antonio is like, you know, like a bubble of Texas. The Texas that you wish Texas was. You know?
Yeah, and then I can at least say that I've been to Texas.
Well, yes. And also you can meet the three rascals that live with me.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they're the whole reason
the
they would come. Yeah,
Of course. Adri, who knows her? Anyway, this is not a travel podcast and not a podcast about chihuahuas, although I will say that chihuahuas take up a lot of the space.
Basically a podcast about chihuahuas.
Yeah. Little in stature, but big in our hearts.
Exactly.
Anyway.
Yes.
Accurate. Okay, today's single focus is going to be the last chapter of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix. This is chapter number 38. It's titled The Second War Begins. You know, like a super low-key title.
Yeah. No, not an omen for things to come in the next book at all. No.
Not dramatic at all.
I just am, gotta say, so excited to be closing out Phoenix here. I love the book. It's a great book. But as we all know, Half-Blood Prince is next, and I can't wait to be able to say that we are going to get to discuss The Other Minister, which is one of my favorite chapters, and I know my friend Rex's ultimate favorite chapter of the series. I can't wait. But this chapter, The Second War Begins, this is the one where, following the Ministry finally admitting that Harry was right all along, the group returns to Hogwarts to finish out the final days of term before returning home for the summer vacation. Meanwhile, Harry desperately attempts to seek anyone or anything that could possibly help him cope with Sirius's death.
Whew, I felt this one, like, en mi corazón.
Yeah, this was a very intense chapter, emotion-wise. As an empath, like, you and I both, like, as empaths, I feel like this chapter hits really hard because it's really emotion-heavy.
Well, also, it kind of bookends that feeling of emotion throughout the book.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I know that the cover in the US version that I have is blue, and I feel like it is blue for a reason.
Right, yeah.
Ugh, just
this whole book is very blue.
So much sadness and, like, the roller coaster of emotions and confusion and angst. And really that angst is just sadness that he hasn't really learned how to
It's
deal with?
unprocessed. Yeah, unprocessed grief
Yeah.
and sadness and emotions that he really needs to see a therapist about, for sure.
Honestly, he goes through the stages of grief in this last chapter too.
Yeah, you're jumping ahead a little bit because
I'm so sorry. I didn't see your politic, I swear to God.
I was like, don't worry, I will talk about it.
It's just, well, but before we get to the politics, big shout out to our patrons who listen to the show on a regular basis and get weekly bonus content and keep this podcast afloat, as we say in this Titanic riddled podcast analogy. And, you know, pay for our podcasting related fees and subscriptions. I mean, I know this is kind of like behind the scenes, Celine, but like I just got like notification that Apple Podcasts is launching like this like new business model in which we may have to pay a yearly fee. I'm looking into that.
Goodness.
So fun things. Just, but if you want to help us keep this show afloat, you can head over to patreon.com/occupolitics.
Yes, we love our patrons over there. $2 a month is going to get you access to bonus content for every episode. And then the $5 and $10 a month tiers are going to get you those really awesome physical rewards that I talk about every once in a while that Idri makes. And they're so unique and fun. So just sign on up because you're going to want them.
Definitely, just like my artwork alone.
Exactly. Don't you want to be able to like own something that's like, it's an Adriana exclusive?
But speaking of Patreon exclusive content, it's not just the stickers, it's not just the recipes. Guess what? We are going to talk about Girl Who Lived, where we discuss what would happen if the characters were gender flipped in the series. And today, we are tackling my favorite duo in the entire series. One, Fred and George Weasley.
Yes, the Wild Twins.
I thought it was like fitting, right? Because like this is a chapter where we see like their business, like brick and mortar business, like start.
Yeah.
And I was like, yes, we've talked about like what kind of business book they would write. Let's talk about how we would look at them if they were like some business ladies.
Yes, we get to see them all spiffy in their dragon skin suits, which, I mean, I guess dragons must be like the cows of the wizarding world because they, like, I don't know, like, they make everything
is there
out of
dragon's milk?
I don't know, but like, it's just like dragons. I didn't think they would kill them for their byproducts in the wizarding world. That just surprises me because, like, are they not like rare magical beasts? They must not be rare. They must just be dragons like running around everywhere. If they can kill them,
or do just they just like take a normal lizard and like put it in engorgement charm and say this is dragon skin?
Maybe that's probably what the like the fake people, the like ones that make the fake Louis Vuittons and stuff like
the
that.
Counterfeit.
Yeah.
Oh.
Well, until then, we're gonna head over to our Potter Watch segment where we discuss some of the latest news in the United States.
Potter Watch, what the ministry doesn't let you know.
Oof, the news. Love the news. AKA hate the news.
Actually, it's just hate the Republicans right now. They're being so
yeah, no, for sure. But by news I mean the things that Republicans do, right?
Yeah, they're disappointing us one day at a time.
Continue, like the only thing Republicans are consistent on is disappointing us. Honestly.
Yes.
So, do we remember what happened on January 6th, 2021 in these United States of America?
I hope we all remember. Yeah.
It's not as like catchy as like remember, you know.
The 6th of January.
Exactly.
For those of us who don't remember, just a nice friendly reminder. Insurrection, Capitol, you know, Trump supporters attacking.
Domestic terrorism. Yeah. Failed coup attempt. You know, just like those light and fluffy things that happened on January 6th. While Mike Pence was, presiding over the certification of the votes that confirmed Joe Biden as the president-elect as the president of the United States. So within that riot, insurrection, mm-hmm. some police officers were killed by the mob that stormed the Capitol. And it is the families of those officers who were, killed or died by suicide after the fact, or who were injured, who want answers, right? Mm. Why did this happen? How did this happen? It's not just like the Americans like us who also want the answers, but these people were impacted firsthand. Their families were impacted firsthand. Yeah. And the GOP, the Republicans, in other words,
grand old party,
decided, you know what? We don't need a bipartisan look into why this happened and how it happened. No.
And
like,
I don't get what they gain from blocking the investigation. I really don't, because like Trump is out, you know, like.
well, they gain well, what they gain is, like, they can't say, like, it was the Republican Party's fault. Like, they are trying
But
to
it but
avoid
they can, like, this is
responsibility.
their chance to like make a distinction between the Republican Party and Trump supporters. Like, this is a chance to be
Yeah,
like,
I
we
think
are the
it's
Republican Party. We stand for, not attacking the Capitol.
integrity.
Yeah. And we don't support the rare like right-wing off group that did this. Um
You know what I wonder though, Helene? I just wonder if there's more skeletons in that closet than we know, because why
Probably
would you block something if you weren't
scared of,
afraid
yeah.
that something would come back to bite you in the butt, you know?
Yeah, there's definitely probably stuff that they don't want us to find out with an investigation, which was why they blocked it. It's just, it's gross and despicable and just really disappointing.
Well, speaking of the insurrection at the Capitol or storming of the Capitol, the Justice Department added 4 new defendants to the federal criminal conspiracy against the Oath Keepers, which, is connected to the Capitol riot. In terms of, like, they are believed to have been, like, orchestrating. These are the people who are, like, in full military gear, had, like, comms in their heads, and they were, like,
Yeah.
distinct from the rest of the crowd.
Okay. All right.
Do you remember that, like, picture of the guy with the zip ties? One
Yeah,
of,
I
those
don't.
people.
I do not remember that, but I'll take your word for it.
It was, like, an iconic one where he was, like, jumping over something and he had zip ties in his hands,
Ah,
that were, like, the ones
meant
used to, like,
to.
bind hands.
Well, yeah. So what? Like, the thought is that he was going to use them when capturing senators,
Yes,
congressmen. Okay.
senators and congresspeople,
Okay.
yeah.
Well,
Those were also the people who had the, blueprints and stuff of, like, all the secret passageways that not secret, but, like, the security passages and stuff like that.
yes.
Hopefully, we get to see some movement, you know?
Yeah. The only other piece of news I wanted to make sure I brought up before we leave Potter Watch was Marjorie Taylor Greene likening the mask mandates to being in the Holocaust. Yeah, that was bad. Basically, she was going on television and saying that forcing people to wear masks is the same as forcing the Jews to wear those Stars of David that like marked them as Jewish before then being carted into trains and taken to concentration camps where they were killed in gas chambers. Yeah, because those were the same.
Yeah.
It was bad, and then she
Like, that is
doubled
such
down
a
on it.
bad fallacy. It's just such a bad, like, logical fallacy, and this is what the public has taken as, like, "Oh, this is argumentation, which is, like, logical fallacies," and I'm like, "Have you never gone to a English class, my friend?" You know?
Yeah, well, and then
But,
she doubled down on it and was like, any rational Jewish person would agree that it's bad to make us wear masks or whatever. I mean, it's like, no, like no, any rational Jewish person would
ma'am,
see that
no.
these two things are not even remotely comparable, and that you are really, really downplaying the Holocaust for your benefit. So get out.
Like, what is it with these, like, people and wanting to be the victims so hard? Let it go,
I
guys.
know it's
Let it go.
it's really sad, and I just hate that she still has some sort of semblance of power in our political system. And I think I wish that they could just kick her out, because I don't want anybody who thinks that wearing like a mask mandate being anywhere similar to the Holocaust, like I don't want that person in our legislation. Like I don't want it.
Unhinged. These people are unhinged, is
Yeah.
what they are.
Yep. So
Well, from that delightfully light topic, let's
yes.
move on to another light topic, which is the politics that we think Chapter 38 carries. And we have such lighthearted politics this time.
I know.
I can't even.
Yeah. Mine's the politic of happiness. No, I'm just kidding. I wish.
Well, Helene, you can go first if you want, since I, like, spoiled it before knowing what it was gonna be.
Well, okay, so I actually alluded to doing this politic last episode. I decided against it last episode, but then I was reading through this chapter and I was like, yeah, I gotta do it for this chapter.
Did it, like, smack you in the face again?
It was just like way more obvious in this chapter. And there wasn't another topic that I felt could be like a little bit more obvious.
Well, I agree, 'cause, I actually was thinking about this one
Yeah.
until I came to mine, so I get it.
Yeah. So I did the politics of grief. We also did our Patreon exclusive segment last week on this topic. So I'm going to try not to talk about the same things that I talked about in our Patreon exclusive segment last week, and kind of keep it specifically to this chapter. So, grief is defined as deep sorrow, especially when caused by someone's death. And so, obviously, we all know what grief is. We've all probably, experienced it in one form or another. It might not been grief at the loss of a human life, but you can grieve changes in life. You can grieve, like, loss of a job or loss of a home or lots of things. But in this chapter, we get a really, really good look at how Harry's navigating his grief following Sirius's death. So we kind of, as you mentioned earlier in the chapter, Harry does kind of experience all 5 stages of grief, if not only in this chapter, throughout the last 2 chapters leading up to this chapter. So, for example, Harry definitely experienced denial at the end of Beyond the Veil. And then we see in The Lost Prophecy, in the last chapter, he definitely experienced anger. That was a big one. And I think the big one in this chapter, although the only one he doesn't experience in these 3 chapters, I would say, is acceptance. And I don't think he will accept Sirius's death until probably beginning of book 6. The big one we see him navigating in this chapter is bargaining. And then we do see a bit of
100%.
depression as well. So the 5 stages of grief, as a refresher, are denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. So yeah, this chapter is big on bargaining and depression. And when I say that I think that we see bargaining a lot in this chapter, it's definitely in Harry's attempts with both the mirror that he finds from Sirius in his trunk, trying to get to speak with him one last time, and unfortunately failing, and then finding nearly headless Nick and trying to, convince himself that Sirius is going to come back as a ghost so that he can speak to Sirius again.
So the moment with the mirror is interesting to me because I saw that as a moment of renewed denial.
Yeah, I think that bargaining and denial are pretty similar in ways.
Mm-hmm. And then, like, mostly the denial part to me with the mirror came because he was like, oh, I know he's gonna be able to. And then, like, he had that thought of like, oh, he didn't have the mirror.
Yeah, I
with
think
him.
like at this point, he has allowed himself to like admit that Sirius has died, but he's at the point where he doesn't want it to be permanent yet.
Yeah.
So like, it's not that he's denying that Sirius is dead; he's denying that it's permanent, because we're wizards. It's magic. How can death be permanent in magic? We can do so many things. We can make things float in the air. We can change, the basic like physiological state of things. Why can't we make dead people not dead?
Well, it's a bargaining and denial that Lord Voldemort is always in.
Yes, exactly. Lord Voldemort is just he doesn't want to believe death is like possible for him. But just so the listeners are aware, the definition of bargaining in terms of the stage of grief is the hope that the individual can avoid a cause of grief by attempting to change the outcome or seek compromise. So, trying to make himself feel better by convincing himself that Sirius is not 100% fully dead and he can still speak to him in one way or another, which unfortunately is just not the case here. So, and then we also see as I mentioned, depression as a stage of grief in this chapter, where Harry is like, he talks about how when he's with people, he just wants to be alone, and when he's alone, he just wants to be with people. I think it's pretty universal when someone is going through depression to just have that feeling of loneliness all the time, even when you're in a room full of people, either feeling lonely or
Yeah.
wanting to be alone. But then when you're alone, you want to not be alone because it just makes you feel worse. But then being with people also makes you feel worse. It's just like a horrible cycle. And we see
Yeah,
Harry
it's like a catch-22 of, like, there's no winners here.
exactly. And Harry's definitely going through it here. And I just feel so awful for him. But we also see here Harry's grief lessening in the presence of Luna, who is the only other person in Harry's life at the moment who he feels can truly relate to, and he can truly feel comfortable around her when it comes to discussing or feeling or expressing his loss and his grief, because Luna she knows what he's going through. I think is why he feels he can be comfortable around her.
Luna is one of those characters that has such hidden depths, right? And the way that she talks about grief and loss is really interesting.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, so that's why I picked grief. It's kind of just culmination of all the grief that Harry's felt the last few chapters is just coming to a head in this one. And we see the grief portrayed in just so many different ways and aspects, both in this chapter and in the last chapter. And it's just really interesting to me as a psychology major.
Well, and also throughout, I mean, if we went to like put this throughout the thread of the entire book,
Yeah,
right? Like grief is a big factor here.
yeah, yeah, definitely. But before we get into the deep dive, let's talk about your politic, and then we can circle back
Sure.
to that.
Mine is the price or cost of war. When we think about like the price of something, we usually think about like monetary costs.
Mm,
And for sure, like war is monetarily costly. But I'm thinking also in a more um like intangible sense of cost, right? So it can cost like human life. It can also cost, sanity, or it can cost like an imbalance in people's
yeah,
mental health. It can also cost changes in the landscape or culture where this war is being waged, and it has like a heavy burden on society and those who fight the war and even those who don't fight the war,
hmm,
because they're going to be in one way or another shaped by the war that is being waged. And honestly, I'm not only thinking about this in the sense of this chapter, um, because it has been 20 years since we been at war in Iraq. So that has also been weighing pretty heavily on my mind recently as we look at and examine, especially as we are recording on Memorial Day,
right,
um, the wars that the United States has engaged in and why and what have been the outcomes of those wars.
yeah, yeah, definitely. It's
So let's go to our deep dive. Like when we're talking about grief and loss, what quote or moment did you pick to exemplify that?
there were a lot to choose from in this chapter, but I decided,
For sure.
yeah, I decided to go with Harry looking for Nick, nearly headless Nick, and asking him about the process of becoming a ghost and why, like whether or not Nick thinks that Sirius would choose to become a ghost and all of that, because I feel like that was a big culmination of like I don't know, it seemed like he had a big epiphany and he had this idea and he was so sure about it, and it was like his one last grasp at hope that he'll get to see Sirius again, which I think, although everybody navigates and experiences grief differently, I feel like it's pretty universal to try anything that's in their power to see the lost one again, the lost loved one again. And just because we're in a magical world where rules don't exactly apply the same, um, it makes sense that this would be Harry, where Harry's mind goes to.
Well, and even Nick recognizes that because he kind of alludes to that in saying like, "Oh, I knew you were going to come for me eventually
Yeah.
because whenever someone suffers a loss."
Yeah, poor guy. He has to deal with like all these people just coming to him at like the height of their grief,
On top
wanting
of
him to, and then he has to give them bad news, right? Like he has to tell them like you're probably not going to see the person that you want to see again.
also on top of like not being able to participate in the headless hunt.
Right.
Like he's already dealing with so much inside. Now he has to deal with other people's things. Come on, guys.
Yeah. Poor Nick.
Poor Nick. Well, my quote that exemplified to me, and it could exemplify the politics of grief for sure, but like the cost of war is the
Well,
following.
they're very
And yet,
intertwined.
yes, 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 yes. And yet, sitting here on the edge of the lake with the terrible weight of grief dragging at him, with the loss of Sirius so raw and fresh inside, he could not muster any great sense of fear. It was sunny, and the grounds around him were full of laughing people. And even though he felt as distant from them as though he belonged to a different race, it was still very hard to believe as he sat there that his life must include or end in murder.
Yeah, that was my second choice. It was between that moment and the one I chose for grief, because that's the height of, so like the one I chose was his height of like bargaining, and this moment that you
Correct.
chose is the height of his, I feel like the height of his depression.
And like edging into acceptance a little bit. Now, what I want to focus on this quote, right? It's this moment of he could not muster any great sense of fear. It was sunny and the grounds around him were full of laughing people, and even though he felt as distant from them as though he belonged to a different race, it was still very hard to believe,
Yeah.
right? So that to me is almost describing the experience of a soldier returning from battle
Right. Which he
and
is.
trying to integrate into a society that has moved on without him and has not seen or experienced the terrible things that he has.
Yeah.
And that disconnect is why a lot of our, veterans or soldiers require such intensive help to reintegrate into society because there is a very visceral cost to people's mental health.
Yeah. Yeah.
That feeling of not belonging anymore in that um culture that they once felt was
And
supportive of him or included him is very much a
yeah, and
soldier's
I think
experience.
it's compounded even more by the fact that he's a 15-year-old, and
Yeah, no, the small thing of him being a
yeah, so
child.
he's a 15-year-old, and all these people, it's sunny on the grounds, people around him were full of like the grounds were full of laughing people, they were all happy. It's because they're children, and you don't get to be a child because you have to deal with the fact that your life has to either, include or end in murder. And you just lost someone extremely close to you. You are a soldier returning from battle, not being able to fully reintegrate to society because your society is full of children who don't have
And
to
you're
deal with
supposed to be
this.
carefree and young and like you
Yeah,
don't feel that way. And yeah.
it's just so much harder for him too. I feel so much for this boy.
Well, I feel it's safe to say that my character is Harry
Same.
for this.
Yeah. Yep, we both had the same thought. Yeah. I mean, Harry
I mean, who else?
Harry is feeling all the things. He's going through all the things in this chapter.
Okay, so when you think about grief throughout like Order of the Phoenix, what are your thoughts?
I mean, I mentioned earlier that, not even just this chapter, but the last two chapters, we've definitely seen like a microscope on Harry's grieving process and
Mhm.
going through all the 5 stages. But then we also have to remember that the book began with Harry going through the grieving process as well with Cedric. So this entire book, he's kind of been cycling from one grieving process to the next. He's grieving the loss of his
Mhm.
friend Cedric. He's grieving, the loss of his childhood, the loss of his innocence, kind of, as we mentioned a few chapters back. And then he has to go through the whole process again from the beginning when he loses Sirius.
Well, I think, I mean, I know that you alluded to all of this like in a very general sense, but I
Yeah.
think it would be remiss of me to not like expand on a little bit on something like we also see Harry grieving the loss of his reputation.
Right. Yeah.
We see Cho trying to grieve Cedric by being with Harry and like very clunkily navigating that.
Yeah. Yeah.
and and also Harry grieving what the relationship he thought he had with Dumbledore, because now Dumbledore's kind of keeping a distance from him,
Right.
and grieving like the idea of like that, he can because of the whole like Arthur Weasley situation, like he felt a lot of shame and grief over it.
Yeah.
So it's just a book filled with, hey, guess what? Harry is grieving again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, I feel like we probably mentioned this a couple of times already, but what people perceive as angst in this book is really just
Oh yeah.
Harry grieving and not being understood and not having the proper outlets to
Oh girl, I was just about to say proper
yeah
outlets for grieving.
not having someone to help him through it, not having the tools to help him navigate his what he's feeling and his grief, and it comes out as angst, and he seems like a little whiny bitch, but I mean I don't care. He deserves to be a whiny bitch. Give it to him.
1,000%. For me, like the politics of the cost of war throughout Order of the Phoenix really comes into focus because once Voldemort like strutted out of that, cauldron
Yeah.
looking like a 90s model, is why I'm imagining
Yes.
him.
Worked out well.
Very like kind of like Coke chic,
Yeah.
That's to me the start of the war.
Yeah.
I don't care.
The second war began at the end of the last book, not this chapter.
Exactly. like not when the title of the chapter dropped. That's when the Ministry found out
right.
that the second war began, not anything else. So the moment Voldemort is back, the war is on, baby, right? And in this book, we see like how Harry like navigates this cost of war by like his like reputation that is like tarnished as being this like crazy person, even though he's trying to do the right thing and telling the truth as he knows it and understands it. Plus, on top of all of that, like he is very aware of the cost of war because like a literal child died.
Right.
That was his, competitor in the Triwizard tournament. Plus, now everyone around him is in even more mortal danger than before.
Yeah, I mean...
That's a lot to carry as, like, a 15-year-old.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Harry's been carrying a price of war since the beginning of the first book, when his parents died in front of him, Like...
like when he was left at Petunia's doorstep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like he's been having to deal with those consequences this entire time.
It just seems like more heightened to me, at least.
Yeah, no, definitely. Like the stakes are upped at the end of Goblet of Fire.
So you thought that things couldn't get any worse?
Right.
Guess what?
Have we got a surprise for you?
Speaking of things that got worse, though.
Yeah, no, definitely.
It's time for Dementors and Chocolate segment, where we talk about, like, the bad things about this chapter and the good things about this chapter. Helene, what was your Ted Cruz / Dementor for this chapter?
Yeah, I think mine actually kind of works well with what we've been talking about in terms of, like, price of war with soldiers and PTSD, not being able to reintegrate into society. Mine was actually, not surprisingly, about Umbridge, but not about something Umbridge did in this chapter. It was more about so Umbridge in this chapter, we see her very briefly in the hospital wing. And she very obviously is suffering some very intense PTSD. From whatever went down with the
Yeah.
centaurs. Whatever went down with the centaurs,
Yeah.
which I know that there's, and we can briefly discuss this if you want, but it's kind of like widely known in Greek mythology that centaurs are kind of known for, kidnapping human women and raping them.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's kind of maybe accepted in the Potter fandom that whatever happened with Umbridge and the centaurs happened to do with sexual assault of some sort.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So, because she comes out of the forest, visually unscathed, we can't see any signs of damage, but she is very messed up. Like she is not well. And so she's suffering this awful PTSD. She hears they fake the clopping of the horse hooves, and she like sits up and is really scared. And I didn't like how they kind of glossed over her PTSD and or kind of laughed at it.
Yeah, I don't like that either. That's always kind of actually that was going to be my Dementor, and I was like, Adria, that's so dark.
It is dark, and it feels like I mean, we spent this entire book being like, Umbridge sucks. She's the worst human.
Yeah, but you know what?
But no one
Even
deserves
people who
that.
Suck deserves like any violence committed against their person, sexual or otherwise.
Exactly, and like, even though we might feel some sort of like weird vindication to see someone who we dislike be in pain in one way or another, she's still a human being, and I wouldn't want anyone laughing at me after having PTSD from a potential sexual assault. So I wouldn't want to wish that on anyone else either.
I completely agree. Like, Umbridge can and is a trash human being,
right?
But we don't get to laugh at something traumatic.
Yeah, I just think that makes us as bad as her.
So for me, I think the Dementor was, I chose a lighter one because I was like, this is really dark, Adriel. Calm down. Like,
yeah, no, definitely.
Because I was trying to be light. Michael Corner being such a bad sport, like,
yeah,
where he got so butthurt about Gryffindor beating Ravenclaw. And Ginny's being like, if you can't handle this, we're done.
I love that that's the reason she broke up with him. I absolutely love it.
I mean, valid. Super valid.
Right.
What a piece of crap.
Yeah,
anyway.
Like Ginny's not gonna stand for her boyfriend, like, feeling inferior to her Quidditch skills. Like, suck it up. I'm better than you at Quidditch, so just deal with it, and if you can't, then I'm gonna go find myself a boyfriend who can. Yeah, so Michael Corner is a big ol' sour loser, and but you know what's not sour but sweet? Chocolate. So what's your chocolate?
I mean, unless you're eating bitter dark chocolate.
That is true. I tend to avoid that, but I like to.
All right, so let's pretend like it's milk chocolate, okay?
Yes. Milk chocolate is my personal fave, so I will stick with that.
All right, so what is your chocolate in this chapter?
I think we had similar chocolates.
Yes.
Yeah. So mine was Harry finding solace in Luna, being able to come to her, feeling comfortable around her. It was nice to see him for the very first time. Someone asks him about Sirius, and he doesn't immediately just like not want to talk about it. Finding that, like, navigating that space where he might actually be ready to, have that conversation with someone was really nice. What about you?
Well, like you said, ours are similar.
Yeah.
Mine was Harry's, like, desire to help Luna find her things and, like, her serene calmness throughout it all. I just find her such a comforting presence in this chapter. Also, shout out to, like, Mr. Lovegood getting some hard-earned cash for selling the Harry interview to the Prophet.
Yeah, I mean, he striked while the iron was hot, and he reaped his benefits. So good for him.
I mean, maybe not the best investment in like their trip, but you know what? It's his money.
Yeah, I mean, I would adjust. I mean, I would use my money to take my daughter on a trip, even if it is to look for a thing that doesn't exist.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's not a
yeah.
good investment if it doesn't exst. It's not
Yeah,
the trip.
But I mean, they should just go on a trip to Sweden. That's what I'm just gonna believe it is. It's just a fun father daughter trip to Sweden.
You like misgendered that entire thing.
I was gonna say daughter or mother son, and that's not true. It's father daughter. I was thinking of gender flipped Xenophilius and Luna.
Oh, I love this. It's it's a parent child trip.
Yes, that's what I meant. Yes, they them.
They them, exactly. Well, Helene, we've talked about our politics. We've done a deep dive. And we've talked about Dementors and chocolate. So you know what time it is now? It is time for the media we've been consuming. See, I did echo. It's fantastic.
It was the homemade echo. I liked it a lot.
We're low budget here at Accio Politics. It's fine.
We make it work. So, what is the media that you've been consuming, Adri?
When you find a new show to obsess over and it's new, and you're like, well, fuck, I hope it doesn't get canceled.
Yep.
Because everything I love gets canceled. That's how I feel about this show. It is a show on HBO Max called Hacks. It follows two kind of unlikable characters, but also lovable, to me at least, because I'm a little bit sour. Like, it's like a Sour Patch Kid, but like less sweet than sour. You know what I mean? Like, it's very sharp comedy.
Yeah.
It follows a comedian, an established comedian, and her like kind of like a Joan Rivers type comedian.
Mm-hmm.
Past the fame and glory, who is still famous enough to have a Vegas residency, but QVC sponsorships and stuff like that. And she's like at a stop, like at a kind of like a downward slide in her career.
Right.
And she's represented by the same guy who's representing this TV writer who made a off-color joke on Twitter and got her project canceled.
Oh, man.
So he tries to pair them together. So she's like this like 20-something like millennial bisexual woman who gets partnered with this like, seasoned comedian because they're like, maybe she could help you punch up your show. And it's about like this like dynamic and like very complicated relationship that kind of gives me like mother-daughter vibes, even though she's not her mom.
Yeah.
It's really interesting. It has a lot of sharp comedy. It's definitely not for everyone, but I laugh a lot and I can't wait for more episodes. Please don't cancel it, HBO Max.
Yeah, I mean, I have a basic knowledge of this one because I think that there's a team at my new job that is working on the social campaign for this one. So I have heard things about it. I just haven't watched it myself.
I love it.
Yeah, I mean, people at my company who have watched it so far seem to really like it. So I do want to try it out. But
there are 6 episodes out right now.
Yeah, I hope it's doing well. I hope it continues to, make more episodes. That'd be nice.
It's also like about 30 minutes per episode, which for me is the goal for comedy type shows.
Yeah.
It's also quite dark comedy too. So
it's kind of like a sitcom a little bit with,
Yeah, but it's like full of dark comedy as well. I mean, when I say comedy, I don't mean like, oh, isn't it funny or slapstick? It's like quite dark.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll have to check it out for sure. I've heard.
What about you? What have you been watching?
Yeah, mine's also on HBO Max. I'm not surprisingly rewatching a show from the early 2000s that I didn't know.
This is your brand now. This is your brand now.
Well, this has always been my brand. It's just I'm solidifying it in the airwaves.
the airwaves.
Yes.
In the airwaves of the internets.
Exactly. So I didn't know that I used to love the show when it was on the air, but it's been years and years and years and years and years since I'd seen it, so I don't remember a thing about it. But I was so surprised to find out it was on HBO Max. It's called What I Like About You, with Amanda Bynes and Jenny Garth, where Amanda Bynes plays Jenny Garth's 16-year-old sister, who their father moves to Japan, and her sister Valerie, who is 10 years older than her, is living as a young adult in her own apartment in New York City. And so instead of moving to Japan, Amanda Bynes' character Holly moves in with her older sister so that she can stay in the United States and, be with her friends. And it's just like two sisters navigating life as young women. And I really like it. It's cute. And it's a sitcom type of thing. And it's just love to see Amanda Bynes. She was a big part of my childhood. The Amanda Show was iconic.
Oh, like one of my faves. Yes.
Yes. And this is like post Amanda Show, but definitely not as like silly as Amanda Show. So it's good to see her versatile acting skills for sure. So yeah, I recommend checking it out if you haven't. It took place from like 2002 to 2009 or something. And so you get to see a lot of great early 2000s outfits, which is probably one of my favorite parts of watching shows from back in that time period.
Back in the day where the dinosaurs roamed the earth.
Yes, you get to see a lot of like midriffs, crop tops, like, flare jeans.
Boot cut jeans. Wow.
It's great. Prime.
Well, speaking of HBO Max and rewatches, I have also been comfort watching, as I didn't feel that well this weekend, The Nanny on HBO Max.
Oh, that's a good. I haven't seen that show. I've only seen a couple episodes of that show, but I've heard great things about it.
Yeah, so I forgot how good season 1 was.
Ooh, okay.
Like in terms of like,
check it out.
Never watched it, and you came to it kind of cold. Everyone kind of knows what The Nanny's about, but what I'm talking about. You're like, oh wait, were shows this good season 1?
Right. It's very rare. Oh, that also reminds me, I watched the Friends reunion when that came out last week. So that was fun because I'm a big Friends fan. I've always been a big Friends fan. And it was really nice to see the reunion and see them all come back and reminisce and go on set. And it was cute. I enjoyed it.
I have not seen it yet, but that is probably next on my queue. Well, if you're okay with this, Helene, I think that's it for today's episode.
Yeah.
And next time, we're talking about the entirety of Harry Potter and the Order of the Phoenix next time, and talk about, like, the politics throughout the entire book. Like, what one politic would we choose if we had to choose one for the entire book? So, should be interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be difficult. Well, if you've enjoyed this conversation, please take a second to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or wherever you happen to be listening to this episode right now. As we've mentioned, it helps new listeners find the podcast, and it makes us feel good. So please do so.
I mean, I'm just like a armchair psychologist here, but I feel like we just have a need for external validation too. So,
of course, yes, always.
Well, until then, politics managed. Support this show by going to patreon.com/OccioPolitics. Our patrons keep this show going. You can find us online at OccioPolitics.com, and we are at OccioPolitics on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. You can email us your thoughts at info@OccioPolitics.com. Leave us a voicemail at 915-996-1699. And you might just hear yourself on the podcast. Adriana Wilson is the founder and creative director of the podcast. Helene Karp is the producer and social media manager. Allison Pullman is the audio wizard and editor who makes us sound so good. Cover art and physical rewards are designed by Adriana Wilson. The views expressed by the hosts and guests are expressly their own and not representative of their employers or associates. Ocupolitics is part of the MuggleNet family of podcasts.